Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Ignition News. It is January 10th. And before I get into the top stories for today, I do just want to provide a little bit of a commentary and a little bit of opinion before we begin to the show. The Ignition News is a daily news show that is hosted on Spotify, also other platforms. And I just want to say, first of all, big thanks to everyone who followed the show yesterday. Yesterday was the #1 day ever across all of my podcast platforms of show followers on Spotify, and then that cascaded to all the other platforms as well. And our news episode from yesterday, the January 9th edition of the news yesterday, was the most downloaded episode ever across all of my podcast platforms ever. So this show, the Ignition News, is going to be a big thing. So thank you everyone for following the show, and I do appreciate it, and for supporting us on the back end as well. If you do want to monetarily support the show, I do want to let you know you can do that by going to buymeacoffee.com/Rebel Radio. I'm going to recognize a couple people who supported the show over the last couple days. Jess, Carmen, Marty, Claudia, Alicia, Potato, Cheryl, Corbin, Tomorrow. All thanks. Big shout outs for supporting the show. It does help a lot. But listen, the reason we need you to follow Spotify is we want advertisers to pay for this news. We want to take advantage of this corrupt system, and we'll make BarkBox pay for the show one day. That's a goal of mine. One day there's going to be a BarkBox ad just for Kodak. He'll be their official spokesperson. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Ignition News. I have some serious news to talk about today. I also want to try to lighten up some of the stories today, but we are going to get into a pretty serious story right off the top of the show. So good morning. I want to remind you that our show is sponsored by your viewership and by Ignite, fighting fascism in the age of its rise. So let's get into the #1 story of the day. And this is going to be breaking news. It's going to be the first time that you're hearing about this today. It's both news and commentary, but it's going to be a different position than something that you probably have heard from me in the very, very past. Welcome to the January 10th edition of the Ignition News. I want to have a breaking news story for you, so kind of sit back. Segment #1, breaking news. Martial law has been declared in the United States of America. It's our top story of the day. Let me be very clear about something. Martial law has been declared in the United States of America. It just hasn't been officially branded yet as martial law. When federal agents can shoot an American citizen on a residential street and the federal agent immediately declares that the agent has absolute immunity from state prosecution, that is martial law. When the FBI blocks state investigators from accessing evidence in a killing committed by federal agents, that is martial law. When the Vice President of the United States declares that a federal law enforcement officer is immune from prosecution for killing someone, that is martial law. That is the reality we are living in right now in the United States of America. And I want to be the first person to tell you this so that you can accept that reality and that we can move forward. But if we do not, we can't move forward. This is the reality that we're living in the United States of America. Renee Goode was killed by an unaccountable ICE agent, Jonathan Ross, on Wednesday morning in Minneapolis. Within hours, the federal government began constructing a pretext and a legal framework to justify this murder that we all saw with our own eyes. Vice President JD Vance stood in the White House and said, the precedent is very simple. You have federal law enforcement engaging in a federal law enforcement action. That's a federal issue. This guy is protected by absolute immunity. He was doing his job. And that is martial law. That is a lie, by the way. And legal experts immediately called out the lie for what it is. Federal officers do not have immunity. There is something called the Supremacy Clause, which protects them from state prosecution only when they are reasonably acting within the bounds of their lawful duties. The University of Wisconsin's Law School Democracy Research Initiative put it plainly. The Supremacy Clause only applies when federal officials are responsibly acting within the bounds of their lawful duties. When federal officers act beyond the scope of their duties, it violates federal law, or behave in an egregious manner, state prosecutions can move forward. If the state of Minnesota does not prosecute this individual, then it is simple. We have martial law. Hennepin County Attorney Marty Moriarty said, even more bluntly, I can't speak to why the Trump administration is doing it or why they're saying what they're saying. The ICE officer does not have complete immunity here. But there is historical precedent. In the 1990s, an FBI sniper shot and killed an unarmed woman during an siege at Ruby Ridge, Idaho. The Attorney General declined to pursue federal charges, but a county prosecutor in Idaho charged that individual with involuntary manslaughter. The Ninth Circuit Court allowed the state prosecution to proceed. In 1906, the Supreme Court allowed a state prosecution against 2 federal soldiers who killed a man they believe was stealing federal property. States have and can prosecute federal officers for violating a law of the state for over 2 centuries. This is not new. This is not unprecedented. This is how our federal system is supposed to work. If this individual is not held accountable for what he did, we have martial law. And they're doing it systemically. First, they killed Renee Goode. Then they claim immunity. Then the vice president declares immunity. Then the FBI has literally cut out state investigations. But let us talk about that last part because that is particularly egregious. Minneapolis Police Chief Brian O'Hara said the FBI and Minnesota's Bureau of Criminal Apprehension would jointly investigate the shooting. That is standard procedure for officer-involved shootings. State and federal investigators are supposed to work closely to ensure accountability. But within 24 hours, the U.S. Attorney's Office reversed course. They said the FBI would lead the case alone. The BCA, the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, was cut out of the investigation, and Jonathan Ross was exfiltrated from the state of Minnesota within 1 hour. What are they hiding? This is unprecedented, by the way. Federal authorities don't usually cut state investigators out like this. We do have jurisdiction to make this decision with what happened in this case. That is what Marty Moriarty said. And she's right. But here's what makes this dangerous. The federal government is trying to prevent a fair and free investigation, and they have essentially already determined that this individual has not committed any crime. Our eyes, however, tell a very different story. And that, my friends, is not a legal system. That is martial law. So our first breaking story on the Ignition News today, January 10th, 2026, I'm claiming it here. If the United States does not have accountability and laws for illegal actions committed by federal agents, a masked police force acting on behalf of the president with no accountability, then we have martial law. Welcome to the Ignition News, everyone. That's been our first story. Now, before I continue, I want to let you know, as scary as this time might be, as deep as a statement like the United States has entered into a period of martial law might be, I want to let you know also, it could certainly be much worse. If we can draw anything from this, it is that we have entered this state of unprecedented federal abuse by the most incompetent administration in history. These are the D- students running this show. And we are fortunate, if one can be fortunate, we are fortunate that the people trying to strip us of our rights are quite literally the most incompetent officials possibly in the history of any administration in the United States of America. And so if hearing the statement that the United States has entered this period of martial law causes you alarm or anxiety, well, I want you to know that you are smarter than them, that you're more capable of them, and that you are the actual patriot. Patriots defend the Constitution. They don't shred the Constitution. Patriots protect the Constitution. They don't destroy the Constitution. Let me read you something from an article just published this week. DOJ's failure to act signals a troubling abdication of its authority to enforce the constitutional limits of federal agents' coercive power. That's exactly what they are doing. They're claiming immunity. They're cutting state investigators out, and they're building a legal wall around federal agents. Let's take a pause. Let us talk about what actually happened in the shooting, because it's important for us to document. There's a really good piece by 404 that really takes this piece by piece, segment by segment. So I want to take you through some things that they identified and why they're cutting out the state. Here's what 404 found. They obtained multiple videos of the shooting, and those videos show something very different from what DHS is claiming. Here's what actually happened, and this is based on multiple verified views. A maroon Honda Pilot sits perpendicular in the street. A silver Nissan Titan drives up and stops because the Honda is blocking its path. Two officers in body armor exit the Nissan and approach the Honda. Someone yells, "Get out of the fucking car." One officer tries to open the driver's door and reach through the open window. The driver reverses and turns, straightening out the road. The driver slowly accelerates and starts to turn right, pointing the car away from the two officers. A third officer, who has been standing on the other side of the road, pulls out his firearm while the car is turning away from him and fires 3 times into the car. 2 of the shots are fired when the vehicle is already well past him. He is not in front of the car. He is to the side. The officer then calmly holsters his weapon. The one thing that I think other people have pointed out, and we're going to move on from this because I think a lot of people are covering this story. You all know what you saw with your own eyes. The one thing that's important to point out as we research and see what happened is this officer, Jonathan Ross, and you can see the video as he walks around, and you see for the first time Renee Goode in person, and you hear her voice. You see that she's not threatening in any way. Any grown adult man, by the way, who says that they felt unsafe around Renee Goode, what kind of man are you? What kind of low T, low energy, bitch energy do you have that you're afraid of this woman sitting in her Honda Pilot? What kind of little bitch are you, by the way? Anyways, moving on. The thing that is most damning for Jonathan Ross in the entire situation is Jonathan Ross is holding his phone in his primary or dominant hand, right? Which is what we all do. We all tend to, when we're filming something, we tend to hold the phone in our dominant hand. As he's moving around the vehicle, Jonathan Ross takes his phone and he switches his hand. He puts the phone in his non-dominant hand to grab his firearm. This is an act of premeditation. If he was acting in immediate, imminent self-defense, he would not have taken the time to switch his hand and grab his firearm. He simply wouldn't have had time. So that one act alone, and the thing about that is the government releases this footage. They release the footage, and I genuinely think the government thought, oh, this is going to exculpate Jonathan Ross. I think they thought people would see what happened, and they would say, oh, he was justified in order to do this. But nothing could be farther from the case. And the last thing I'll say about this, the thing that really haunts me right now, the thing that bothers me the most about this is when you watch the video from Jonathan Ross's perspective, very briefly, and for but a moment, you actually see, and I think this is the most damning evidence, by the way, you actually see this woman's dog in the back seat. And one thing about Americans is Americans love their dogs, and American dogs love their owners. And the thing I know, I've had dogs my entire life. And when I saw that old man's little gray bearded face in the back of that car, I knew instantly that no one was in any danger, because I know that any dog that would be with its owner, if its owner was in imminent danger, if its owner was angry, if its owner was projecting, any dog would be rallying, would be protecting their owner, would be barking. That dog was probably in the exact same mindset as Renee Goode, okay? That dog was sitting there thinking, my mom's fine, something weird's going on. I love my mom. I'm sitting in the back seat. She's in a good mood because she probably thinks she's doing the right thing. And that dog's just sitting there in the back of the car. That dog did not advance towards the officer. That dog did not bark. That dog was not aggressive in any way. And anyone who has dogs, I know how my dog would respond if I was under duress or threat. I know how my dog would respond if I was angry or if I was acting out. I know how my dog would act if I was scared. I know how my dog would act if someone was angry at me. And what that tells me, and this is my opinion, obviously, I'll point this out. I'm not a dog expert. But what my dog, if my dog sensed I was in imminent danger, it would act accordingly. And what that tells me not about Renee Goode or not about the dog, but what it tells me about Jonathan Ross is that Jonathan Ross was hiding his intention to kill Renee Goode. That's my opinion, because the dog didn't pick up on it. My dog picks up on the Amazon guy when the Amazon guy is 3 blocks down the street, okay? When someone scuffles, another dog walks by outside, doesn't even know the dog, my dog picks up on the dog and he starts barking immediately. That dog was sitting in the back seat because his mom was engaged in peaceful protest. Her energy was reflective of someone who was engaged in peaceful resistance, documenting and witnessing collectively, calmly, rationally, and peacefully. That dog responded in the way that any dog would respond. Because you know what? We can look back at this now and we can criticize what she did, what the officer did. In that moment, this is a woman backing out of a driveway in her own community. Probably no different than any other day in that dog's life. Probably no different. And so we can look at camera angles, we can look at analyses, we can look at body camera footage or Facebook video, all of these things, right? But to me, the most damning information, the most convincing piece of evidence is not a bullet, is not a window, is not a vehicle, is not a video, is the face, the little gray bearded face of that black dog. That black dog proves to me that Renee Goode was not acting with malice. And it proves to me that that officer was concealing his intentions. And as we covered yesterday, the Department of Justice has for a long time known that its officers engaged in the practice of jumping in front of vehicles or standing in front of vehicles to falsely, with false pretext, claim that their life is in danger and then shoot people. That is something that is a pattern of practice in the United States of America. And it was such a pattern of practice that they actually had to change their policy. A report in 2013 and 2014 analyzed 67 cases independently of misconduct and use of force by CBP, which is under DHS, which is the same agency as ICE. And that report from a police investigation agency uncovered that CBP officers were, number one, shooting people, throwing rocks at them. That's what probably most people remember, by the way. You all remember this story from 2013, 2014. Border Patrol was shooting people, throwing rocks. That was the scandal. That scandal was what caused the report to be, what caused this investigation, because CBP was shooting people, throwing rocks, which is also, by the way, which is also illegal. It's an unnecessary use of force. So they commissioned this report, and what they found in the report was that CBP was stepping in front of vehicles to justify or create pretexts to shoot people. And how we know, so the one thing I'll say, I said Kristi Noem was lying, but in retrospect, Kristi Noem is actually telling the truth. Kristi Noem said the officer was following his training. Well, according to this report, CBP was identified to be stepping in front of vehicles to justify the pretext to kill people. So even though the policy was changed, I can't disagree with Kristi Noem. It seems like someone trained this officer that if you want to justify shooting someone, you just step in front of their vehicle and lie about the fact that you're in danger. But we also know this, by the way, by what has happened. By what has happened. Every ICE shooting and fatality this year has been the same story. They have claimed that someone has used their vehicle against an ICE agent, and then they have shot them, and we know about 5 killings so far. There may be as many as 9. So now we know this has been happening since 2013. CBP was identified to be stepping in front of vehicles to justify shooting people. They were trained, they were told to stop doing that. Every instance this year by CBP, by ICE, has been this exact thing. Vehicles causing the reason to shoot someone. This is why we do the Ignition news, everybody. This is why I need you to follow us on our favorite platforms, whether that's Spotify or Apple Podcasts or YouTube. I'm bringing you the news that they're not willing to tell you. Thank you for following us here on the Ignition News. We're going to get back into that story after a brief pause. Our show is brought to you by Ignite, fighting fascism in the age of its rise. Let's take a brief break for a commercial. All right, everybody, thanks for that. Our show is sponsored by Ignite, fighting fascism in the age of its rise. If you're looking at these times and feeling a sense of hopelessness, we've created a field guide to fighting fascism, and it's called Ignite. Download season 1 right now. It's a free podcast with 12 episodes and 4 bonus episodes. Season 2 comes out January 12th. I'm very proud of it. The first episode of Ignite is called How to Steal an Election. It's good stuff. Let's get back into the show, everybody. I want to close out this section. We started out today talking about one simple premise, the breaking news, if you will. And that news, I will tell you, is the same now as it was when I started. The United States of America is under a state of martial law. If you've been following me for any time, you will know that I've actually openly challenged the idea that the President of the United States has the ability to declare martial law. In fact, he legally does not have the ability to declare martial law. It is not a power that he has. He does have the power to invoke the Insurrection Act, something I've talked about at great length. And indeed, the Insurrection Act has been enacted in the United States of America almost 40 times, if the number serves. I don't have the exact number right now, but the Insurrection Act has been implemented in the United States of America, and it does have some of the powers that are often claimed to be martial law. However, what we have now is actually much more dangerous. What we have now is a police force with a budget larger than most militaries, which is now able to go out on the streets of America, terrorize our communities, and is offered impunity and immunity by the administration. And what the president, but specifically what the vice president did, is the vice president told the ICE agents very clearly, I see what you did. We've got your backs. I think that lack of calm, professional attempt to turn down the temperature, but instead really turn the temperature up, was irresponsible. When the vice president makes that kind of claims, we are already seeing ICE agents. How many of you have seen the clips? I'm sure you've seen the clips. We already have ICE agents out on the streets telling people versions of this. They're saying, oh, haven't you learned your lesson? Didn't you see what happened? You guys better stay in line. I saw a clip of an ICE officer yesterday saying to some people on the street, they were recording the ICE officer. He said, haven't you learned anything? Didn't you learn your lesson? That is martial law, friends. And that was our first story here on Ignite. But I'm not the only one who has this opinion. I want to actually share with you, I'm sure many of you have seen this, but perhaps you haven't. So I want to just play this clip from you from former Minnesota Governor Jesse Ventura. Jesse Ventura, professional wrestler, for Jesse the Body Ventura, professional wrestler, surprising Minnesota governor. A lot of people don't remember Jesse Ventura was elected as Minnesota governor. Complete surprise, huge shock. he pulled a great victory. I got to remember to talk about that on Ignite, by the way. But he was also a professional wrestler, governor of Minnesota. A lot of people don't know he was actually a Navy SEAL. So let's hear what Jesse Ventura has to say. This clip is worth sharing. So here we go.
I spent 17 months in Southeast Asia while the draft dodger was playing golf, right? You know how I know we're a third world country? Because in third world countries, they have the military doing their police work in the cities when you walk around. I was in the Philippines the day Ferdinand Marcos declared martial law and went under dictatorship. We went from nobody to a guy with a machine gun on every corner. That's what happens in a dictatorship. In comes the military. That's what's happening here. And people better wake up to it. You want to read something? Then read your history of Germany and start comparing the tactics of what happened in Nazi Germany to what's happening here. History. You learn from history. Anytime you have the loss of life that it needlessly happens, that's tragedy. And what occurred yesterday did not have to happen. You want to know something?
So that was Jesse the Body Ventura, former governor of Minnesota. I was talking about the vice president's irresponsible comments. And actually, I should be clear. The vice president's lies. The vice president got up and lied to the American people. I actually think that they recognize the situation is so bad that JD Vance had to take one for the team. And they said, like, hey, buddy, you got to be vice president. Peter Thiel put you here for a reason. You need to go out and take one for the team and try to wash this shit up. And it was very bad. But as I was saying, that's the kind of tone we should expect from a vice president. Any loss of life is unnecessary, right? Like that's the kind of thing. But I'm not even gonna repeat what JD Vance said because it was just stupid, irresponsible, reckless. At any rate, everybody, I want to say thank you for following the show. I have one last story to close it up. I actually had 5 stories for the show today, but we really kind of got into this segment here that I think was probably more important. So it's really going to be that one. But what I would close out is kind of one last story to bring you a little bit of hope, and maybe not hope, but to realize how unserious this administration is. So the president was actually hosting a meeting in the Oval Office. And as scary as these times might be, when you see masked federal agents unaccountable in the streets, try to remember who is leading these people. Donald Trump, the president, 47th president of the United States, is sitting in the Oval Office, or in the, I think it was the Oval Office. He's having a meeting about oil companies, what they're going to do in Venezuela. Number one, we're starting to learn that it doesn't seem like a lot of companies are going to want to go to Venezuela because of the cost of extracting that oil, let alone the fact that we don't know if any future administration is going to allow this project to continue. Nonetheless, the president, the oldest president in the history of the country, who is openly exhibiting signs of senility, signs of dementia, who has to put makeup on his hands to cover up bruises on his hands, who has cankles the size of my head, who falls asleep in meetings, who talks about the size of Arnold Palmer's, it's having a meeting in the White House. Marco Rubio passes the president a note talking about infrastructure. The president looks at the note and he reads the note out loud. The president says, "Go back to Chevron. They want to discuss something." So Marco Rubio hands the president a note, and he is so lacking presence. He is so lacking the ability to focus, lacking the ability to be serious for any period of time, that he reads the note out loud. This is an embarrassment. And as scary as these times are, I am grateful to know that when fascism came to the shores of the United States of America, that it did not send its best. It did not send even close to its best. We are battling for the soul of the country right now. We are battling for freedom to liberate all people right now. And it is scary to know that you can be killed in the street by a federal agent for doing nothing but watching what they do, and that your government will go lie about that and tell the world that you are a terrorist. That is terrifying. That is martial law. But that martial law is being enacted by incompetent, unserious, unprofessional, and incapable people. And we will ignite. We will rise. We will collect, and we will push back against this fascism. Have great hope in knowing that you have neighbors in your community, that you have people in your community willing to stand up and resist this. Understand and know what you are fighting for. Let me close out with one final thought. First of all, thank you for following the show. Please consider following us on your favorite platform. The final part of the conversation is about narrative. One of the things that unfortunately the Democratic Party is not good at, and this is not a Democratic Party show, by the way, but they're terrible about narrative. But the fact that there is no strong opposition to fascism in the United States from the Democratic Party does not mean that you cannot be that thing. As you well know, both on Rebel Radio and the Ignition News, we do not advocate for violence. My lawyer always tells me, remember to say that out loud. So there you go. But we can control the narrative, and we have to stop seeding the narrative. And so I'm going to tell you what happened, and I want you to own and control and enforce the narrative. It is as follows. Renee Goode died protecting democracy, protecting the Constitution, and protecting her neighbors. Renee Goode was an American hero. Renee Goode was a patriot. Renee Goode died protecting democracy. She belongs in the annals of history. She deserves to be remembered as an American citizen who refused to put her head down. She died protecting your rights. She died protecting my rights. She died protecting people she would never get to meet. And she ignited hope and optimism and rage in this country. And her death is not in vain. She lived a powerful and important life. She died young. She was 37 years old. I'm much older than that. And every day of my life past 37 has been a gift to me. Take her tragedy as a gift to you. Do not allow them to change the narrative about this American hero. Renee Goode is an American hero. She died protecting your rights. She died protecting democracy. She died protecting her neighbors. And she died and inspired the rest of us to do the same. Renee Goode is an American hero. When it comes to what you need to do to protect this country, the answer is simple. Be good. That's our show, everybody. Thanks for following the Ignition News. Welcome to the Ignition News, your unfiltered, uncensored source for the actual truth in what is happening in the United States of America and around the world. We are not bought by the billionaires. We are here to be your source of truth in a time where truth matters more than it ever has. Be sure to follow along with your favorite platform on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or Substack. Let's get busy with the truth. Welcome to the Ignition News. Let's ignite.